Vivi is going to be the 10th member of the Straw Hats. It's funny how times change. This time last year it was all about Carrot and Yamato, and now things have taken a big swing back to Vivi. 10th to join is probably incorrect though, because both she and Karoo have been members since Alabasta. And I actually went back on Vivi's farewell, and there was an interesting thing in that chapter. Vivi referred to the Straw Hats, or I guess the Going Merry, as a light, which is pretty perfect in retrospect. Because whether or not Luffy was supposed to be a literal sun god at this point in the story, Oda was gearing towards that light aspect from near to, if not the very beginning. And if Vivi knew she was a D, I think she would immediately flee to Luffy, but right now, she doesn't. I mean, I guess there's a chance that Wapol may have overheard Cobra, but it's very unlikely. And what's been set up is a future meeting between Luffy, Sabo, and Vivi, where this information is set to be dropped. At which point, Vivi will, presumably, understand Alabasta's legacy and future, just like how Cobra came to his conclusion. Which should be a really interesting situation, because I don't think we've ever seen someone discover that they are a D. Just people discovering that the D that existed all along has more meaning than they thought. And in a way, this new information recontextualizes the whole Alabasta arc, something that I now feel the need to go back and reread. But the TLDR at the moment is that arc is essentially a story about Luffy saving his own kingdom. Now it kind of makes sense, the fact that Imu had a photograph of Vivi. My only question is, why did he cut all of the photographs except hers? So there are two interpretations of this. Imu cut up the photos of Luffy, Blackbeard, and Shirahoshi, and there were even very specific close-ups of all three of them. Imu made sure to curiously slice away at an eye from both Luffy and Blackbeard, as well as stab Shirahoshi's photo also in the eye. And the way most of us read this at the time is that Imu took the photo of Vivi to the empty throne. And then when the elders asked, great Imu, which light would you like to be erased? Imu said, this one, the Vivi one. But there is another possibility. Also, this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends, who now have a limited animated series called Raid Call of the Arbiter, a 10-part series dropping every Thursday at 10 AM EST until July 20th. It's pretty wild because you can actually watch these episodes in-game. And what I really like about them is that each episode focuses on a particular individual from a particular faction with beautifully fluid animation and an immersive cinematic score by Jesper Kid. The series expands the world of Raid and the lore of Raid, exploring the backstories of many of the game's iconic champions. And Raid continues to celebrate with a ton of Call of the Arbiter features coming to the game, with new champions and all sorts of fun activities to take part in. There's lots of new stuff for Raid fans to sink their teeth into, like some sort of delicious Michelin-style game steak. Plus, everyone will have the chance to get the legendary champion Artak for free. He's one of the 5 new characters in the show, and you can acquire him by logging into Raid for 7 days between now and July 24th. I really like Artak because he's green, and green is an objectively good color. You can download Raid by using my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get a free starter pack with this cool in-game loot. So do that thing, but for now it's back to you, me. But there is another possibility. The other interpretation is that Imu decided on Luffy, Blackbeard, and Shirahoshi to be erased from the world. The former two because they are very public Ds, and Shirahoshi because I imagine that the connection to Joy Boy and Poseidon is at the very least suspected. But Imu was on the fence about Vivi because he suspected that she was a D but didn't know for sure until Cobra said so. So he kept her photo intact just in case, because he wouldn't want to make some sort of murder mistake with a founding family member. What if Blackbeard ends up partnering with Luffy to take down the world government after learning the meaning of D? It's so hard to see that happening. Even if it's in Luffy's best interest, there are a total of 2 people in this world who he will never work with. Those 2 people being Blackbeard and Sakazuki, and both of them for very ace-based reasons. However, it's becoming less and less clear who will be the final antagonist of One Piece. I think both Blackbeard and Imu have a good claim to the spot, and it is clear that Imu considers both Luffy and Blackbeard to be his enemies. And you know what they say. The enemy of my enemy eats excessive cherry pies, led to the death of my brother, and is in general just a little bit of a dick. But maybe they could become extremely reluctant or even accidental allies. Because in the end, Luffy and Blackbeard, they are 2 sides of the same pie. And maybe that's what it takes. Maybe you need a fusion of Ds, the entire D clan, to overcome a force as powerful as Imu. And look, all I'm saying is, I don't not want to see Luffy and Blackbeard versus Imu. Could Zunesha somehow be Nefertari D Lily? 800 years, punished for somehow letting Joy Boy down. Gorosei and Imu having having giant transformations. I'm seeing a pattern here. So am I, and that pattern is this idea popping up a lot, I think much more than it should be. I do think that we as a fan base are far too quick to jump to the wackiest possible conclusion, but to be fair, that's because we've been conditioned by the author to expect the wackiest left field possible solution. And really, only in One Piece can we suspect that an ancient queen was transformed into an immortal elephant and cursed to walk the planet for all eternity. And just on that, Zunisha does have a specific species. I always forget it, but it's the Night Tamie Norida elephant, implying that there are, or at least there were, more of them. And look, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I don't think that Queen Nefertari D. Lily is an elephant, although it would make for an interesting conversation with Vivi. Hello, Vivi, I am your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. I'm also an elephant. I did notice, yes. And you're probably wondering why. The thought had crossed my mind. Well, funny story, you see. And then Oda activates a tragic Senor Pink style flashback that makes us all cry over the Elephant Queen. Cobra isn't dead yet. Since we know that he is a D carrier, we need to see the panel where he is smiling at his end. True, so we saw Cobra standing, then we saw a close-up of a serious face, sort of like a meh. And then we cut to a shot of him on the floor but facing away. So there's still no confirmed smile as of yet. Meanwhile, every other D who we've seen die or about to die has smiled, so I'm hoping there's a wrap-up shot in the next chapter with Imu looking at the corpse, seeing Cobra smile, and just being infuriated. I should say it's not confirmed that every D has to die with a smile on their face, nor do you have to be a D to die with that trademark smile. I think Kozuki Oden would be the best example of that, because despite his severe lack of middle initial, he well and truly departed this world in fitting D style, which, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it, cultural appropriation. Bad, Oden, bad. Other than the smile though, Cobra did die in a very typical Will of D manner. He passed on his inherited will in the form of an unforgettable speech/sacrifice. So for now, I'm going to give Cobra the benefit of the doubt. Since Sabo was seen getting hit by the Shadow Elders, as I'll call them, I won't, I'm not going to call them that, that means they can use Haki. Or perhaps it's something else that we don't know about. Either way, 5 Elders are Haki users confirmed. It seems they're not incompetent after all. So I don't know about the use of the word confirmed, but this is why I make videos like this, because that's something I didn't even think about when I was reading the chapter. But Sabo is a Logia user and his fruit was completely bypassed, which means that yeah, we're either talking about armament Haki or something much more sinister. Like say a similar effect to that of Blackbeard's Yami Yami no Mi, which cancels out fruit powers for well, reasons, and since it's Logia, maybe there is a natural power out there in the world similar to it. Or it might be something literally devil related. It's a very popular idea right now that what Sabo was hit with was a devil's tail, like your stereotypical cartoony devil tail. And then you think, wow, what good would devil fruits be against the devil themselves? The Occam's razor answer is still armament Haki, of course, but it's also unclear exactly who was attacking Sabo and Cobra because it's not necessarily Imu. Although just on that, this chapter does raise a lot of questions such as, I didn't realize those silhouettes were the 5 elders. I thought it was Imu's powers. So after realizing it, I was quite surprised. So that's the thing. While the silhouettes are all sorts of different shapes and stuff, they aren't your typical Oda silhouettes. And they do seem very, what's the word, cohesive. As if they're all part of the same power rather than 6 separate silhouetted abilities. And it has been suggested that what's happening here is an extension of Imu. Either that his specific abilities can affect others, or that the elders themselves are actually part of Imu, using the same sort of idea as Vegapunk and his satellites. Just much less cloning and science and much more magic and fruit. Although I have to say, I don't even really know where to begin with that thought. It's kind of like an external internal crisis, because I'm now not 100% convinced that those 5 old men actually exist. I feel like Imu's fruit is a dragon type fruit, but not like Kaido's fruit, more like the punk has a dragon. You know, it's possible there were some definite dragon vibes, especially when Imu swallowed Sabo's fire, and he does seem to have this like fearsome zigzaggy mouth in that form. And remembering that dragons are pretty special in the One Piece world, and this story has a deep connection with them, whether it's in name like Monkey D. Dragon or the Celestial Dragons, or even the literal dragons we've encountered. They always seem to sit at the pinnacle of the world, with the exception of Vegapunk's dragons, I guess, but his goal was to emulate the Alpha Predator. However, I personally hope that Imu isn't a dragon, if only because I'm feeling just a little bit dragoned out after Wano. I feel like I could never see another dragon in my life, and that would be satisfactory, because I've already experienced so much of Kaido and Momonosuke. But if Imu is a dragon, he seems to be shaped more like a classic cartoony Western dragon, and I have to say that could have some fun potential interacting with Gear 5th. Perhaps the final fight in the series, Luffy vs Imu, will play out more like a Cuphead boss battle, because in all seriousness, where do you go from Gear 5th? Toon power can only be countered with other Toon power. This chapter somewhat confirmed that the shadowy figure at Egghead Island is Jay Garcia Saturn. I don't know about confirmed, but I do think it's slightly more likely. Now that we know that Saint Saturn can transform into a crazy shadow creature, that means that the crazy shadow creature idea is more plausible. The problem is that when this happened, Saturn was nowhere near the island. The figure also didn't have his horns, but maybe it was just a partial transformation. The core idea itself is kind of terrifying though, because I've never seen the Seraphim as a massive threat, but the idea of an insanely powerful shadow elder, damn it, I used the name I said I wouldn't use, roaming the island is genuinely kind of scary. Is Walpole going to get a proper redemption this time? There is no Walpole redemption. I think what we see is what we get. This isn't a Saint Moscard situation, and for one very important reason, which is that Walpole's entire appeal is that he's a bit of a prick. He's one in a long line of comical antagonists who we love for having nefarious intentions, but a complete and utter lack of ability to actually be threatening. He's very much on the Caesar and Carabo side of the spectrum. And just imagine how boring Walpole would be if he repented and became some sort of pure-hearted protagonist. Nah, I don't like it. Serious question though. Will Walpole at some stage end up traveling with the Straw Hats? Because his options right now are pretty limited, and if Vivi were to go that way, would Walpole ask them for asylum? Because we should remember Walpole does have a bigger purpose here. Right now, as far as the world government is concerned, he is one of the 2 most wanted men in the world. So I can't wait to see the pivotal role that Walpole falls into in the story. What's the best way to make rice? I keep burning it or undercooking it. That is a good question. So when you're cooking rice, you need to use the 2-to-1 ratio. For every 1 cup of rice, it's 2 cups of water. You put that in the pot, you put the pot on the stove, and you set it to a low heat setting. Low, not high, low. And then you let the rice simmer for 10 to 20 minutes. Depends on the stove, really. Or what you do is you get a rice cooker. Does everything for you. If you mess up with the rice cooker, then you have no hope. Do you think that next chapter we will go back to Egghead? At this point, I'm not sure, because I've been expecting to go back there every week for a month now. But the way 1085 ended doesn't feel like the end, because right now it's on a very action and comical note, whereas flashbacks usually have a much more full stop style of ending. With the Reverie itself, there's not a lot left to resolve. How Vivi and Walpole ended up with Morgans is probably the last big question I can think of. And even then, that's not such a pressingly big question, so there's probably a little bit of flashback left. But even after it ends, I don't know if we're going straight back to Egghead. Right now, I'd expect to see a little bit of the Revolutionary Army again, and from there, who knows where else Oda wants to take us. Because stuff is happening everywhere, and honestly, I'm in no rush to go back. Thinking about it, it's been more than 2 months since we've seen Egghead Island in real world time, and people are starting to jokingly say that the rest of Egghead will be off-screened, a sort of flip on your typical Oda story, since right now we're seeing all of the stuff that would traditionally be left off-screen. But that's why it's so hard to predict, because we are in completely uncharted territory at the moment. None of what's happening right now is sticking to the classic One Piece script, which is why even after close to 1,100 chapters, I am still completely on the edge of my seat with this series each and every week.